at the bottom of Hey Amud Aleph, the bottom of 5a. So as I mentioned, Rabbi Gimple sent me an email with commenting on, collecting from other commentaries on why the number 64 specifically, in addition to what we talked about, and that 64 is 2 times 32, 32 being the amount of pathways in the 2 different parts of the mind, the innovative part, the analytical part, each one 32. In addition to that, he shared some comments from other commentaries on why 64. So a lot to do with gematria, like numerical value of 63, and then 64 being one more of 63. But I do want to mention, he mentioned, someone in the YouTube comments last time mentioned, and I mentioned this last class, that there's the idea of bittul b'shishim, the idea of nullification in halacha when it comes to kosher foods, they're nullified by a ratio of 1 to 60. So there is a commentary that makes that point. And as for why 64 as opposed to 60, because the Gemara wanted to have a double number, 1/8 of 1/8. If you do it in 60, I think it's hard to do it in double numbers. Anyway, that still leaves to be wanting, but nonetheless. Okay, so let's see the Gemara now. So the last comment we had was this idea of the heart of flesh. That in order for prayer to be properly accepted, there has to be a certain sense of humility, as described in the pasuk, Yoveh kol basar l'shtachavos, all flesh will come and prostrate themselves before God. Prostration being a form of prayer, the type of prayer that's prostration, type of prayer that has humility, and for that it requires kol basar, all flesh, rather than a heart of stone. And we talked a little bit about what that means and its connection to humility. The person has to. One should not feel complacent and stuck like a stone. I'm stuck, here I am, but rather be alive, breathing, open, willing to change, willing for growth, expressed in the idea of a heart of flesh. So on the subject of flesh, the Gemara makes the following observation. 3 lines on the bottom of the page, right over here. Omer Rabbi Zeda says, Basar ksiv bei, with respect to flesh, it says, V'nirpa, and he shall be healed. Adam, with respect to the word Adam, like ksiv bei v'nirpa, it does not say, and he shall be healed. So this is a reference to the laws of saras. Saras, of course, is the spiritual blemish that happens as a result of, again, this connection, by the way, to lashon hara, to speaking negatively about other people. We had that before. Yeah, the Gemara commented on one verse, how God cannot be, God destroys a certain type of person, and the Gemara offered interpreting the same verse, one to mean someone who's arrogant and someone who speaks evil of others, lashon hara. So here's again an association with lashon hara because we're talking about saras. Saras again is spiritual leprosy that comes as a result of one who transgresses in lashon hara, one who speaks negatively of others, or gossip, more broadly. And that causes saras, one to get afflicted in various different forms and various different details in the halacha, what color, discoloration of the skin, discoloration of clothing, discoloration of the house, and the various different types of colors and so on. Now, when the Gemara, when the Torah describes this lesion, this discoloration of the body, sometimes the Torah describes that a person who has discoloration. And sometimes the Torah describes, and when discoloration shall appear on the flesh. So in terms of the halacha, it remains the same. We're talking about discoloration that appears on a human being and their body. But the Torah's terminology does teach you something. So sometimes the Torah refers to the person who's getting this lesion as a lesion that will appear on a person. And sometimes the Torah refers to it as a lesion that will appear on flesh. So it says Rabbi Zeda, in observing this change in terminology, that when the Torah uses the term basar, flesh, then the verse goes on to talk about the healing process of this lesion, of this discoloration, this tzaras. Whereas in the Torah uses the term a person upon whom there shall be discoloration, the Torah does not use the term the nirpa and he is healed. So even though in the halacha remains the same, the Torah is describing the lesion as it appears and as it heals. But Rabbi Zera is pointing out that the terminology, that when the Torah describes the healing process, the Torah uses the terminology basar, flesh. And this kind of further continuation to last week's Gemara, and this idea that the flesh can be healed. That a person who has a heart of flesh can be healed, can change. The person who's stuck like stone, or a person who is Adam, as we'll learn in a moment, what Adam means, a person who sees himself as an Adam, he is inflated, he's egotistical, he cannot get healing. But a person who is basar, a person who is flesh, that they can get healing. So where is the association between Adam, the word Adam, which means a man, and ego, and basar, which means flesh, and humility? That's the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan says, Adam, the word Adam, which means a man, Aleph, Daled, Mem, is an acronym for Efer, Dam, Mara, which means earth, blood, bitter. So this bitter, Rashi tells us, maybe the pharmacist can help us a little bit here, but Rashi tells us there's some sort of bitter moisture that comes out of the liver, and that moisture apparently it changes based on climate and what a person eats, and that causes either sickness. That can cause sickness if it's not healthy. Rashi says that some doctors call it the black bitterness and others call it the red bitterness. I don't know what this is, but it's some sort of liquid in the body. At any rate, the point is that the word Adam...
I don't think it comes from the liver.
Sorry?
I don't think it comes from the liver. It may come from the bile.
From the what? From the bowel?
The bile. The bile.
I'm not sure what that is.
That's the that very, very bitter stuff. When you throw up, you get that bitter taste in your mouth.
Is it near the liver?
It's the gallbladder. The gallbladder secretes it.
Yeah, it's like a surfactant. It kind of breaks up fat with the liver.
Just breaks it all up.
Oh, but so it's near the liver.
It's usually like a greenish.
Okay, so that's what it is.
It's a greenish liquid that sometimes it gets. If you have a severe case of vomiting, and there's nothing, it sometimes can show up through vomiting, I think.
Okay, so that's what it must be then, because Rashi doesn't say actually from the liver. He says hamerida sheba covered, a certain part of the liver. So maybe it's this gallbladder that's near the liver, I guess. I'm really not familiar with biology.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so that's what it is.
It only secretes that stuff when you can't digest something, or when the body can't digest something.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, so that's what we're referring to then, and that's alluded to in this word mara, the bitter. So that's the three letters of the word adam, man. So the point being, as Rashi points out, Rashi explains, is that the person is he's made of nothing, and therefore there's no reason to be arrogant. He's just a mortal man with all this, just made of earth, blood, and of no substance, just nothing. And basar, the word flesh, is an acronym for busha, which means embarrassment or shame. Sirucha means to smell or putrid. And rima means like to rot. In other words, the body decomposes in the ground. That's what flesh is. It's just matter waiting to decompose. Therefore, not much to boast about. Yeah. Ikadami, others say that the letter, so if you notice, the word basar is beis, sin, resh. But in the acronym, the Gemara goes, beis is busha, which means, the beis of basar. Right, here's the word basar, flesh, beis, sin, resh. So the letter beis is used busha, that's beis. Now for the sin, it's interchanged with the samach, sirucha, to be putrid. So sirucha, samach, and sin, they make a similar sound, and therefore they are interchangeable. But the Gemara wants to get even more accurate and have the sin be an actual sin. So says the Gemara, the others say that it's not a reference to sirucha, which is putrid, rather sha'oil, which is basically hell, purgatory. So here the letters are the same, sin and sin, but it's a shin actually, so it's a sha'oil. Eksiv b'shin, because the word basar is written with a sin, and therefore want to have the same letter. Okay, so although it's interesting that the big difference in adding this word sha'oil is that until then, all the 6 things described in the alluded to in the letters adam, man, or basar, flesh, are all physical, right? Earth, blood, this bitter secretion. Embarrassment is not really metaphysical. It's not really physical, but it's certainly something that we experience here in this world. We can experience embarrassment. We can experience shame. Putrid, the body becomes that way, and rima, the body decomposes. But the word sha'oil, one moment, please. The word sha'oil, which means purgatory or in hell, refers specifically to the soul's experience, not the body's experience, which is interesting. So perhaps that's the extra layer. The Gemara is first going through just describing the body's humility, the humility that comes from understanding that the body is temporary, decomposes, and really just nothing, and goes on to talk a little more metaphysical. I don't know if it means the godly soul or the animal soul, but something more metaphysical. It ends up in a place of negativity. When a person considers that, it's quite humbling. Okay, the Gemara continues. Amar Rav Ashi says, "Call Adam, any person, sheyesh bo gasas haruach, that has arrogance, the soif nifchas, eventually he'll be deflated, and eventually he'll be belittled." Shenemar, as the verse reads, and now again in association with the tzaras, with this discoloration of the body. So the Torah describes different shades of white that are that qualify as this tzaras, as this discoloration, and 2 of them are the seis or the sapachas. Seis and sapachas are 2 shades of white that would cause one to qualify as a tzaras. So the Gemara highlights the 2 words. Now the ein seis, the word seis, Ela Lashon Gavaya, also comes from the term of being haughty or elevated. And the Gemara is now going to introduce a verse which uses the term se'es to describe elevation or haughtiness. Shneimar, the verse reads, Valkala haharim haramim, from all the lofty mountains, Valkala gavoyis hanesoyis, and all the heightened places that are heightened. The word se'es here, this word here, referring to haughtiness, and therefore there's se'es refers to haughtiness. Now, what happens when a person is se'es, he's haughty, he goes to sapachas, which is the other shade of white described for tzaras. Now, this word sapachas, says the Gemara, ve'ein sapachas ela tfela. Sapachas means to be secondary. So, the Gemara is going to quote a verse which indicates that. The verse reads, I'm not sure I pronounced the word. See? Sefacheni na al achas hakahonos lechal pas lechan. This is a verse describing the children of the Kohen Eli, and the Torah is describing what's going to happen to them in a negative sense. And the verse goes on to say that they're going to get to a point where their families are going to ask, please, can you add us to your family to eat the truma? In other words, they're not going to have their own, dignity and their own identity to be able to collect truma on their own, collect the bread that the Kohen eats. Rather, they're going to have to go to one of the other families and say, please, let us join you. So that term to describe asking them wanting to join has this word safach, which is similar to the word sapachas, same letters there, sin feches and sin feches. So we see that this term sapachas means to be secondary. Sorry, hold on a second. And therefore, reads the Gemara, that these two words of discoloration mean something. L'se'es, to the one who's elevated, it leads to sapachas, he becomes secondary, he gets denigrated. Okay, so it's a kind of play on the words. Now again, it's interesting that the Gemara associates this again. This is not already the third time, I think, that we're associating haughtiness with lashon hara, with one who speaks gossip of others, right? Saras being the punishment for gossip. And we talked about this before, how the person who's arrogant often gets their confidence from comparing and putting down others, and therefore they want to engage in gossip. They go hand in hand, arrogance and gossip. One who is humble doesn't feel the need to speak of others, certainly not negatively.
What type did Miriam get? Because she wasn't being arrogant.
Exact color? I don't remember which color she got.
Because she wasn't being arrogant. She was just trying to help.
Right. In Miriam's story, was the arrogance there? I have to think about that. I don't know. Often I can't think of anything. Jews in halacha, as an Rambam writes, that the pretty much any white would count. It has to be brighter than a certain white and not as deep as a certain white. So there's two ends of the spectrum, and each of the two ends have their own subcategory.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the Torah does identify four different shades of white. Anyway, okay. Now the Gemara makes two concluding statements with regard to humility, and then the Gemara is going to get back to you next tomorrow, God willing, back to the Talmud Sotah. Rabbi Levi says, "Come and observe. How great are those who are humble before God? Because at the time when the temple stood in Jerusalem, over here, Adam Makar of Oila, a person offers an offering called an Oila, which is an offering that is entirely burnt up on the altar. Then all he has is the merit or the value of the Oila offering that he brought. Mincha, if a person brought a mincha is an offering of grain, and he has the reward and the merit for the grain offering. But one who is humble, because of the verse considers it as if he brought all the offerings. In other words, in times of the temple, whichever offering you brought, that's the offering you get rewarded for. That's the offering you get credit for, because you only brought that offering. But nowadays, where there is no temple, humility takes that place. And when a person is humble, then it's as if he brought all offerings. Shenemar, as the verse reads, Zivche Elokim, the offering before God is Ruach Nishbara, is a broken spirit. Right? Like the Kotzker Rebbe famously said, I think I quoted Kotz before, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotz, I quoted him before earlier in previous classes. He famously said, there's nothing more complete than a broken heart. Nothing more complete than a broken heart. Now, I'm just going to point out a few things about here. Okay, let's just conclude the next statement. Rabbi Shimon Levi further stated, not only that, not only is someone who's humble, it's as if he has brought all the offerings. Elab, moreover, his prayer is not repulsive, for lack of a better translation. As the verse reads, a destitute and broken heart, God will not be disgusted by it. Which means even if a person is imperfect, but if he's humble, then his prayer is accepted. Even if for some reason that his prayer shouldn't be accepted, it should be quote unquote repulsive because of some misbehaving, some issue that he has. But with humility, Hashem doesn't reject that. Okay, so you can see already a connection here, because the first statement was that a person who's humble is as if he brought all the offerings. The second statement is that his prayer is accepted. So there's already a connection there, in that today, prayer is in lieu of the offerings in the temple. Right? The offerings in the temple was the way a Jew communicated to Hashem. A person actually prayed when he brought the offerings. And today we have prayer in lieu of that. Well, not just pray to communicate to Hashem, but to connect to Hashem came through offering. And it's number one. this also connects to what we mentioned yesterday, last week, that the person with a heart of flesh, this humility, then he has the prostration, and he has true prayer. We see this connection here: humility, prayer, and which are all connected to sacrifice. And furthermore, I'll just offer that something that the Alter Rebbe explains in Talmud Sotah, a very famous teaching about. It's one of the first teachings that a young boy usually learns in Hasidus, where the Alter Rebbe explains the verse which reads, the beginning of Parshas Vayikra, Adam ki yakrav mikem karban laHashem. A man, the verse means to say, a man from amongst you who wants to bring an offering to God, then he shall bring, and the verse goes on to say, he should bring from certain types of cattle, and what type of cattle he should bring, and the Torah goes on to describe the laws of the offerings of the karbanos. But the Alter Rebbe points out the precise and unique language of this verse. It says like this: Adam ki yakrav mikem, a man who offers from amongst you. And the Alter Rebbe points out, it should have said, Adam mikem, a man from amongst you, ki yakrav, when he shall bring an offering. So why does it say Adam ki yakrav, a man when he brings the offering, mikem, from you? So explains the Alter Rebbe, a Hasidic interpretation to the verse. Adam ki yakrav, when a man wants to get close. The word karban, or the word yakrav, which means to offer, also means karev, to come close. And that's what a karban is, it's coming close to God. So Adam ki yakrav, when a person would like to get close, mikem karban laHashem, you have to bring the offering from yourself. That is to say, you have to offer up something of your own. If you want to yakrav, you want to get close to God. And in the spiritual sense, the offering is also an animal, like the animal soul. The animal soul is the root of ego, right? The root of I, the root of the sense of I, as in I am the center of life, comes from the animal soul. That's the animal soul's raison d'être, however you pronounce that correctly. But that's the way he lives. I'm hungry, I want, I need, I go, I come, what's good for me, what's not good for me. It's all I. That's the animal soul. And ki yakrav, when a person would like to get close to God, he has to bring an offering. He has to offer up his animal soul. He has to slay the ego that's in his animal soul. Or using the language, using the borrowing from what we talked about on Friday, a person has to redirect all the energy of his animal soul, which is used for the I, and redirect it. He offers that to God, puts it on the altar and says, I'm giving all of this to you, Hashem. That's what an offering is. And indeed, Hasidus explains the various different levels. There's an animal soul, it's like an ox. There's an animal soul like the sheep. There's different types of animals that are offered in the temple, and they parallel different types of animal souls, different types of personalities that a person might offer up to Hashem. And here comes the Gemara and says that in the temple times, each offering had its type of connection to Hashem, depending on the type of animal that was brought, and it's depending on what you did with that offering in terms of offering up your own animal soul. But there is one type of offering that covers everything, and that is humility. Because humility is the foundation of it all. Once a person has humility, once a person, as we've been talking about, accepts that everything he has comes from Hashem, then no matter whatever kind of animal soul he is, he can offer it to Hashem. And therefore the humility is equal to all offerings. That's the foundation upon which all these offerings are done. That's the foundation upon which a person comes closer to Hashem, is the humility. And if whatever type of offering it is, it's always founded on humility. And this all is done nowadays during prayer. That's what prayer is for. Especially as Hasidus explains prayer, not just saying the words and asking God for what you need, but about contemplating God's greatness and really meditating on godliness to the point that one feels for it, and specifically meditating on God's absolute truth, and therefore my humility in the face of Him. And I'll add one more final comment, which is why is Rabbi ben Levi talking in the negative? Well, he's talking in the negative because the verse talks in the negative, but that too, why does the verse talk in the negative? Meaning, why does it say that one who is humble, his prayer isn't disgusting? Why not say one who is humble, his prayer is accepted, like we learned on Friday? One who has a heart of flesh, his prayer is heard. So why not in the positive here too? One who's humble, his prayer is beloved. Why his prayer is not disgusting? As if the default is the prayer is disgusting? Like what is this? So I kind of alluded to this when we learned it, when we began, and that seemingly the Gemara is trying to say that even if a person has other reasons that would cause his prayer to be disgusting because he has some negative behavior, his humility kind of covers for that. But perhaps a little bit more. Well, two things. Number one, well, there are two things that are one. The root of all of this disgusting element, as it were, the repulsive part of it, is that I, is the sense of I. The sense of saying, I exist independent of Hashem. Even if I'm not verbalizing that literally, but that's what all ego, as we explained in previous classes, that's what all ego really is. A sense of independence, I am me. That in and of itself is a repulsive idea. And the reality is, being human beings, that's the way we are. We come wherever we're coming, even if we come to prayer, there's the I there. And therefore the work of prayer is to remove the repulsiveness. Because you come to prayer with your animal soul. You don't come to prayer necessarily just with your godly soul. Your godly soul doesn't need the prayer as much as your animal soul does, because your godly soul is already connected with God. Prayer, to a large degree, is for the godly soul to communicate to the animal soul. Prayer is that the godly soul's ideas of connection to Hashem should be brought into my heart, into my animal soul, into my conscious human experience. And therefore, the prayer starts off with all of my disgustingness. That's what prayer is, right? Like learning Torah is God communicating to me. So the words of Torah are pure, and I just open myself up to it. Prayer is from the bottom up. Prayer comes from the place where I stand. And I stand in an imperfect place. I may even stand in a disgusting place. And it's possible my default is disgusting. My default is arrogant. And the prayer is to remove that arrogance, is to remove the repulsiveness. Right? So it's not so much that Rabbi ben Levi is talking, perhaps, not just saying in the negative, that if you're humble, your prayer won't be disgusting. But humility during prayer is itself the process of removing that which is disgusting about me. My negative character traits, which come from my ego, are slowly removed during my humble prayer. So he's actually not just describing the way that Hashem doesn't refer to it as disgusting, but he's perhaps describing the process of prayer itself. That in prayer, through humble prayer, I have the capacity to divest myself of that disgusting ego that I carry around with me all the time. Which leads to the second point, which is that perhaps this is also a suggestion how to deal with, how to acquire humility. One of the ways in which to acquire humility is to look at my ego in the face and tell it, you're disgusting. This is repulsive. You walk around thinking about yourself all day? Come on. And that itself is a way of humbling oneself. And this harkens back to the beginning of the Gemara, where the Gemara describes Adam, the word Adam and Basar, describing human being in the most base of terms, just flesh and blood and waiting to rot, looking at oneself and saying, all this arrogance you're boasting about is all nothing. It's all, in the Gemara's words here, repulsive. And looking at myself, looking at my ego in that way will allow me to feel a little humble, and that way truly free myself to be able to connect to Hashem like an offering, like all the offerings, to really truly connect to Hashem and become one with Him. And with that, we go to the final concluding words of the Gemara on this subject, because this is what it all leads to. Rabbi Levi further stated, anyone who places his path, he sets his path in this world. As Rashi puts it, to think about the value of every mitzvah and to think about the value, God forbid, of the opposite. Will merit to see the salvation of Hashem. Shenemar, as the verse reads, and there the path you shall be shown, the Yesh Elikim, in the salvation of God. So over there's a path where you are shown the salvation of Hashem. So says the Gemara, says Rabbi Ben Levi, Al tikri v'sham, don't read it v'sham with a shin, with a sh, which would mean there, but elav v'sam, with a sin, with an s, which means to place. V'sam derech, place your ways, and then you will be shown the salvation of Hashem. Because that's what it all leads to. This is what it all leads to. When a person prays properly, as described above, ridding himself of his arrogance, removing that repulsive part of him, and that allows him to place his path in a way that he follows Hashem humbly and joyfully, and in this way he sees the salvation of Hashem. This is quite a powerful conclusion to a very powerful subject in the Gemara about humility. And then, God willing, on Monday, we get back to the laws of the Sotah itself. Have a wonderful day, everybody. We'll see you all, God willing, tomorrow morning.
Just wanted to add,
Yeah.
wanted to say perhaps also that maybe humility it's not a perfect, no person, even if you have humility, it doesn't mean that you're in a perfect state, that you have things to work out, and that's why perhaps it's phrased the way it is, that
I see what you mean.
Hashem, it's not repulsive to Hashem, because even if you have the ideal humility, it's not perfect.
Right.
And therefore Hashem, and also not to lead people to think that this state is impossible to achieve.
Right. In other words, it's not
if you have
fallings, become perfect, now you're humble, it's all gone, everything's gone. No, there's still you. And maybe that's why it leads to the next statement, which is that after humility comes, now the journey starts. In other words, humility is a foundation. Humility is not the end goal. It's the first step. And then you can place your path. And in and of itself,
also, if a person thinks, oh, I'll never achieve that state of perfection, why even try?
Right. There's also it also has endless levels. There's my father loves to tell the story of Rabbi Sadia Gaon. Rabbi Sadia Gaon, one of the famous one of the earliest Jewish philosophers, one of the earliest Jewish thinkers to articulate Jewish philosophy in the post-Gemara era. Anyway, so the story goes, he was traveling, and he stayed at an inn, and the innkeeper didn't know who he was, so the innkeeper treated him like a regular customer, just treated him properly. The next day, somehow the innkeeper had discovered that this was Rabbi Sadia Gaon, and he came to apologize to him. And Rabbi Sadia said, I don't understand why you're apologizing. You treated me perfectly well. I mean, like every other guest, what's the problem? And the innkeeper said, that exactly. I treated you like every other guest. Had I known you were Sadia Gaon, I would have treated you completely differently. Right? So the story indicates, my father always quotes the story as a way of saying that as you learn more about Hashem, then the more you say, had I known that about you, I would have treated you much differently. Right? So at one level, you want to have a certain understanding of Hashem. You pray in a certain way. But then your relationship with Hashem develops. You learn a little bit more. And you look at you say, that's how I prayed to Hashem. You have a whole different appreciation. So now you have to re-examine all the prayers, as it were, and pray deeper. Right? So the same thing I think is true of the humility, especially when we understand humility to mean that we know Hashem's truth and we are humbled before Hashem. And the deeper you understand Hashem's truth, the more deeper this humility is. And there's never a point I'm just trying to highlight your point here. There's never a point at which you can say, okay, now I figured out who God is, so I figured out what it means to be humble before God. That doesn't exist, right? So as a person travels through life, they're constantly re-examining their ego, as it were, and constantly re-examining their state of humility as they advance in their understanding of what Hashem is. Maybe this is another meaning of that, the next statement, that Samar Chaysav, a person places his path. In other words, he sets himself on a course of ever deepening understanding of Hashem and ever deepening humility. Perhaps, yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful day, everybody.
You too.
Good day. Thank you.
Bye.